Hello and welcome to Dentsply Sirona's Let's Talk Live Implant Surgery with the CEREC system. My name is Kasia Jawa and I'll be your host tonight. We are live from the Digital Smile Studio Clinic in London, and joining me tonight is the team of experienced clinicians from the Digital Smile Studio. Let me introduce you to Dr. Chris Lefkaditis, who will be conducting the implant surgery, as well as take us through the crown design and placement in the prosthetic part of the digital workflow. With us tonight is also Dr. Patrick Zachrison, who will be narrating the surgery and take us through each step of the procedure. Joining us tonight is also Dr. Quintus van Tonder, who will demonstrate the aesthetic part of the prosthetic procedure and show us how to create lifelike, realistic crowns in minutes. With us tonight is also Dr. Adam Nolte, who will be narrating the prosthetic procedure and take us through each step of the digital workflow. Welcome. Joining us tonight is also Jack Hannam, who is a CAD/CAM specialist at Dentsply Sirona. Welcome, Jack. Since Dentsply Sirona is a global company, we are being joined by the audience from outside of the UK, and I would like to say a warm welcome. Witam serdecznie, witajcie všichni, herzlich willkommen. We are filming live tonight in accordance to the local government regulations regarding COVID-19. And in addition to that, we all tested negative prior to arriving on site tonight. So what can you expect from tonight's event? Tonight you'll be able to witness a full digital implant workflow with the CEREC system. And we'll begin with the surgery and then move on to the second patient with a healed implant to demonstrate the prosthetic workflow. We'll be taking a break in between the patients to ensure fallow time, and we are taking highest care to ensure optimal air circulation in the clinical room with mechanical ventilation, with high pressure suction, and with open windows throughout. Whilst the surgery and then the prosthetic procedure are taking place, we'll be listening to a live narration and we'll be chatting all things digital and all things CEREC. If you have any questions for any of our speakers, please use the question function and we'll include your questions at the end of the event in the Q&A section. Without further ado, let's begin and hand over to Chris to hear about the patient case for the surgery tonight. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Kasia. Welcome everyone to this lovely event from Dentsply Sirona this evening. We're going to be introducing you to the CEREC Guide 3 workflow, show you the ease of the workflow, and today we have our patient Anastasia who's going to experience having the implant using the guided workflow, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you join us this evening. I've prepared a little video which shows you the whole workflow so that you can actually get an overview, and let's have a look at that now.
I'm going to take you through the CEREC Guide 3 workflow and explain to you all the stages involved with using the CEREC Guide 3. Our case today is Anastasia. She presents with a missing upper left canine, actually orthodontic treatment which failed to distalize the upper left canine, and we have a gap that needs to be restored with a dental implant. Part of that workflow process commences with a consultation where we discuss and outline all the treatment with the patient. And the beautiful thing with the digital workflow is the degree of engagement by the patient, making the consent process intact and ensuring the patient understands everything we are about to provide them with. Take a look at that digital workflow. The workflow involves the capture of data, the restorative and implant planning, and finally the process of the guided surgery itself. We will then look later at the prosthetic workflow, allowing a digital solution for the patient. The very first stage of the data capture involves the radiographic image. The setup of our patient here is critical to ensure we have accurate data, which we would then use for our implant treatment planning, and the data is then brought within two-side access form. Our next stage in the software involves the setup of the case, defining the information we need to capture with the intraoral scanner. And what I'd like to share with you here is the use of the prime scan in the capture of that intraoral scan and the data. With this latest intraoral scanner technology, we're able to capture the data very, very effectively and quickly. The prime scan offers a very wide field of view and a deep field of depth for the capture of the data. And this really makes the workflow nice and easy as far as the data capture goes. We commence here in the upper jaw, capturing the data of the arch in which we're going to be planning the dental implant. The full color capture is an added advantage, but again, it's critically important to make sure we have an effective scan and the data is captured correctly to ensure that we have a correct CAD model onto which the surgical guide will fit. Importantly, for everyone to remember is that the STL, or the capture of this data, is what determines the fit of the surgical guide, not the CBCT. We capture the opposing arch, as this will be critical in designing the correct prosthetic envelope in the software, which will be exported to the 3D planning software. Once we complete the capture of the opposing data, we then have to ensure that we have an effective scan of the occlusion. We have a bilateral scan option or a continuous scan from one side to the other, locking in the correct occlusion. Once we have all the necessary data, the algorithm in the background will run to complete the creation of the CAD models, which will then allow us to start designing the prosthetic envelope. Our next stage in the process is to design the prosthetic envelope on the CAD models, and we have a series of tools which we can manipulate in order to generate the desired prosthetic outcome that we want. Again, it's important to ensure that the tooth is placed in a good 3D position, as this will determine the correct positioning for where the implant should be in relation to the shape of that tooth. The fine refinements are not always necessary, but I think most importantly, we have to ensure that we have very clear defined data which we can then export into our 3D plan inside Axis. Once we've completed those refinements, our next stage is to export the data to Sidexis as an SXID file, which allows a full color export into our 3D planning software. Our next stage in the process is to open up Sidexis 4 and open the CBCT exam of this relevant case. We can look at the various views in axial, sagittal, and coronal, and in the process ensure that we have the focal plane correct to be able to visualize the surgical site and enable us to effectively plan our 3D position of the proposed dental implant. We then proceed with the import of the proposed 3D plan, which we completed in CEREC, and continue with the merge of the data between the CBCT and the STL. We can see a nice spread is considered across the whole arch, which will provide us a better match or ability to match the two data sets together. And we can see in this next view how beautifully they match together. We also have the option to run through all the slices to ensure that we have a good fit of the STL to the true position of the actual CBCT to enable us to effectively plan our 3D position of the dental implant. We then select the dental implant, and this is brought into the software, and through the different views we are then able to 3D plan with fine adjustments and refinements for the best position for this implant, with the obvious consideration of the previously planned prosthetic envelope to ensure a good prosthetic outcome, but more importantly to avoid any insult to the adjacent anatomic structures that could pose a problem during unguided implant surgery. Our final checks are then completed. We lock it onto the implant axis and rotate around it to ensure that there is no problems with any of the adjacent anatomic structures, and this will prepare us now for the final stage of the guide selection. So the beautiful thing again with CEREC Guide 3 is that the parameters are all dialed in automatically as soon as the CEREC Guide 3 is selected. This means the offset and diameter of the sleeves in the implant are already dictated in the software, and this provides for an even easier workflow in comparison to some of the other implant systems where we have to dial in these important parameters in a manual fashion. Finally, we check the sleeve. Once we're happy with the final position of this implant, we then export the DXD plan back into our CEREC software to start the design of the surgical guide within the CEREC software workflow. The DXD is then imported back to the CEREC design software, in which we will then proceed with the guide production ready for milling in the primal. We have the ability to change the parameters of the surgical guide within the software, and we also dictate the positioning of the surgical guide in relation to the teeth. We draw the outline of the margin of where we want the surgical guide to rest, and the algorithm would then propose surgical design based on the parameters we've inputted in the software. We then have to nest the surgical guide within the PMMA mill block, and we can see the inspection windows designed to ensure correct seating of the surgical guide during the actual surgery itself. The milling information is then exported to the prime mill, and the prime mill is prepared for the milling of the surgical guide. The CEREC guide block is inserted into the prime mill, and the prime mill will then proceed with milling the surgical guide as planned in the software, a process which takes between 30 and 40 minutes. The beauty of the prime mill is that there is very little post-processing involved, other than the removal of the sprues or the supports which hold the surgical guide within the PMMA block. And we can see within this block a few of the sprue supports or the holders for the actual surgical guide. We now proceed to the placement of the metal sleeve within the surgical guide. Very easy and tight and snug fit. With the precision mill, it requires very little interference other than cementation or gluing of the actual metal sleeve to the guide itself. Following a disinfection procedure of the surgical guide, we proceed to the surgical procedure.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that excellent introduction. We are now ready to look at the actual surgery. Patient has now been numbed up, and Chris has got the surgical guide ready to look at. As we could see from the milling video, the surgical guide has been prepared with a metal insert. He's now trying out the fit of the surgical guide, and this is an essential step. In the surgical guide, you can see we've placed windows to ensure that the guide is seated fully, and that's what he's doing now. You can see how the tooth is just showing through, and we can ensure that the guide is sitting in its correct position. Patient is very comfortable here, and we can see the guide is fully seated and that the alignment is going to be perfectly correct here. Chris is starting the procedure with a tissue punch. This is the first step, since this procedure will be probably done completely flapless to ensure a really quick turnaround, healing time and best comfort for the patient. Without raising a flap, in a suitable case, we are able to do this in a really minimally invasive way. This is done by the full digital workflow and the full digital planning, so we can ensure that we end up in the correct position. Chris is just removing the excessive soft tissue here, and we can see that no full flap is raised. Today we're using an AstraTech EV implant from Dentsply Sirona. You can see how comfortable it is for the patient, minimal bleeding, there will be minimal swelling afterwards, and altogether a straightforward workflow. Next, now Chris is going to start preparing the osteotomy with the initial cortical drill. Again, this procedure is fully guided. He's using this first step to just get through the cortical bone, and the guide is helping us right through the whole procedure. The good fit of the guide is important because obviously we don't want the drills to be moving around, and we don't want to have any problems with the irrigation of the coolant going down. In between each procedure, it's quite possible to just lift the guide off and ensure that the site is looking good and clean and tidy, and that we have good irrigation in between each step. Next now, he has moved on to the next drill. This is a really nice feature. If you look closely on the tip of this implant drill, the sleeve is actually following right from the initial step right down to the full length. So with this osteotomy drill, this is probably the 1.9, we have the little sleeve that follows the tip. So even when he first engages the burr, he will get the correct direction, and this is something that's unique for this system. I really like that feature. We're keeping the guide in place, and Chris is going to move up sizes now to prepare the site step by step. You can see again the sleeve up here, holding the tip of the burr and then going to full length, ensuring the correct angulation throughout. Getting a little bit of bone there, perfect. I think Chris has probably got the steadiest hands on the planet. Having a guide gives us a lot of confidence as well, and we have plenty of time to swap drill by drill. Next now he can have a look at the crestal profile drills here. We have different profile drills depending on the hard bone or the soft bone situation. In this patient we have good crestal bone on the outside but nice soft bone in the center, so we're probably going to be fine just using the profile drill A for the softer bone. If you needed to, you could move on and use the B drill, but won't be necessary in this case. Next step after this is preparing the apical portion using the apical profile drill. Again, with this system we have a selection of features here where we can have the V or the X type drill. The V will just prepare the apical third of the osteotomy. If you have harder bone, you can use the X profile drill, which is cutting throughout the whole length almost, giving you a little bit more support. Chris is now checking to make sure that we have nice bone throughout the whole prepared site, that there's no fenestrations anywhere. If you have a flapless approach, this stage is a little bit more difficult and really important to make sure that we have the full contact of bone throughout the entire length of the implant. Looks like Chris is going to be happy with this. We are taking our time, and still this procedure has been extremely quick. A lot of that is because we basically do the procedure twice. First in a virtual way, and then we do it for real. By doing surgical planning based on the CBCT, we have all the information we need, and then we can do it step by step. Chris is now putting the guide back in again. The implant can be placed fully guided. This can be done either with a hand instrument or with the implant motor. In this case, he's using the implant carrier and placing it fully guided. You can see the line markings on the side of the implant carrier, ensuring that we bring in this right down to the planned length. Obviously, we have a really nice low speed on this, and this is something that can be done also by hand. The implant is now placed, and the guide and the implant carrier is removed. At this stage now we have normally a number of different options. We can either bury the implant, we can put a healing abutment in, or in some cases we can do an immediate restoration, at least with a temporary crown. Chris is now checking to make sure that the site is looking tidy. Tightening a little bit further here to make sure we have the correct position. You can see how tidy it looks all the way around, hardly any bleeding. Yes, still have all that nice soft tissue around the implant site, and we can expect a quick recovery on this. We are now placing a healing abutment here to ensure the top of the implant is covered nicely and that the soft tissue gets some initial support. This will give the soft tissue something to heal up against and will give us a nice emergence profile, which is imperative for the restorative process. Depending on the recovery time, we get a nice big smile there straight away. Depending on the recovery time, we will now soon decide how soon we can restore this implant. Just rinsing a little bit to make sure it looks nice and tidy. Because the implant site is already sealed now, there won't be any need for any further sutures, and we don't expect to have much discomfort afterwards because there's been very little trauma involved. The soft tissue has been pretty much preserved, completely intact. It's always nice when they're smiling throughout the whole procedure. And zooming in now, we can see the healing abutment just sitting at gum level, which is exactly what we want to see. No need for any stitches, and I would expect that to heal up really nicely, keeping lots of keratinized tissue in the area. Okay, and that's how you do an implant using the Dentsply Sirona and Astratec system. Fully guided, fully comfortable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. Whilst we prepare the clinical room for the second part of the event to allow for follow time in between the patients, we will now have a short break and play a short video of CEREC and showing 35 years of anniversary. Following that, we will be back with questions to our guest Jack, and then we'll continue with the clinical procedure. See you shortly.
We grasped from the very start that CAD/CAM technology had a bright future in the field of dentistry.
CEREC is all about development. Besides the technological progress, we've always helped our customers to develop themselves.
When we see how happy and satisfied the patients are, then we're happy too.
That's true.
This here is the CEREC 1 model. Back then, it was simply called CEREC, not CEREC 1.
Now is the time to us means that right now, CEREC is as good as it's ever been in its 35-year history. Even customers who decided a decade ago not to go with CEREC will also confirm that. So now is the perfect time to enter into the world of CEREC.
For us, it was pretty clear from the start that it would come.
It was clear to us how much it benefited the patients. So we pretty much knew that when we had our own practice, it would definitely be part of it.
CEREC has just continued to get better. Each new device has perpetually left the old one in the dust.
Digitization in general knows only one direction. It constantly moves forward faster and faster. Today, it's simply much more than we would have imagined 35 years ago.
CEREC 27.5 simply came at a moment of truly fundamental progress. We were presenting the OmniCam, which was the first camera to allow powderless scanning, all in color no less.
The enthusiasm that emerged at that point was felt by everyone in the dental industry. When you see events like in Las Vegas or in recent years the DS World, or also our launch events from PrimeScan and PrimeMill, when you see the enthusiasm, it's catching far beyond the company or the user.
You can certainly say that the scanning with that first camera was nowhere near as pleasant as scanning is now using PrimeScan.
Digital should be fun. We always had that in mind as we were developing PrimeScan.
The great part is that our new employees actually can't wait to finally get their chance to scan on their own first real patients. It's even more fun when you can use the CEREC system as a central component for the whole dental practice.
We are driven by a desire to make our patients happy.
Our mission is to provide the technology that makes that possible, but also to provide support as a company to help them develop.
We've also continued to expand our indication spectrum from the digital workflow.
It was a game changer.
Well, it all started with these 6 prototypes that we'd built and then wanted to put through proper testing. So we found 6 dentists who were willing to try out the technology.
I've never seen that kind of collaboration between customers and manufacturers anywhere else. And I think that you can also attribute it to the fact that CEREC gives something back to customers. Once people take the plunge on CEREC, it makes a huge change in their daily lives and in their practices. You could almost say it's life-changing. Never stop being Prime is our motto and the challenge we pose to ourselves. The goal isn't just to digitize it, not simply to make it possible, but rather to make it possible in an excellent or prime form.
Currently, things move very quickly and technology continues moving ahead faster and faster.
I hope, of course, that this run of innovations will continue. There's no reason that we won't see continued growth, further innovations, and even more of that infectious enthusiasm. That's what I hope for.
Welcome back. Hi Jack, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Pleasure to join you this evening.
Great to have you here. So Jack, a few questions for you.
Yes.
Since CEREC is celebrating 35 years anniversary, are there any CEREC promotions for customers in the UK and Ireland?
Yeah, absolutely. As part of the anniversary celebrations, we've got a couple of promotions running. So for those dentists that are looking at going straight into chairside milling with a full CEREC system, currently we're offering people who are looking at purchasing a CEREC Prime Scan and a CEREC Prime Mill a free of charge speed fire furnace. And for those who have already got maybe one of the existing pieces of equipment and are looking for just a CEREC Prime Scan or just a CEREC Prime Mill, we are also offering a speed fire 50% off.
Okay, and how can customers inquire about these promotions?
So there are a few ways. If you already know who your Dentsply Sirona representative is, your local one, feel free to reach out to one of those to get that booked. Alternatively, you can visit the dentsplyserona.com website, and there is a button on there to book a consultation with the product specialist. And a third option is your usual CEREC supplier. You're able to do that through there too.
Okay, fantastic. And I understand that there's an upcoming release of the Connect software and CEREC software 5.2 version. What are the most noticeable features that customers can expect?
So it's a really exciting update. I would probably say it's the biggest update we've had since the launch of the PrimeScan a couple of years ago. There's a huge number of improvements. Mainly they come in the form of optimization. So loading of cases is much faster. Data is much less per scan, so they've optimized that too. But one of the most noticeable improvements that PrimeScan users will feel straight away after updating is the scanning speed, which in certain situations are up to twice as fast as what they were previously, which is already hard to believe because the PrimeScan's so fast. On top of that, the accuracy and the amount of data points that we're picking up per second is also improved, so we get even more detail and even higher speeds in this update.
Fantastic. So can you tell us more about the technology inside PrimeScan? What makes it so fast and accurate?
Definitely. So there's a number of things, but most importantly with the PrimeScan, what makes it so unique is the patented technology in the camera itself. So there's a number of things going on. There's a lot of technology packed into the actual camera itself. So mainly we can attribute that to the new measurement principle that we have with the PrimeScan, which we call high frequency contrast analysis. It's a new way of capturing images essentially. And on top of that, we've also got a smart pixel sensor and a processor inside the actual camera. So the amount of detail we pick up is far higher than what you'd see with comparable scanners.
Okay. And if customers want to enjoy the technology in PrimeScan, but perhaps are not ready for the full chairside system, can they buy it as a standalone scanner?
Absolutely, yeah. So we actually have two offerings with the PrimeScan. We sell both a PrimeScan, what we call a digital impression PrimeScan, which is for scanning and sending, and then a CEREC PrimeScan as well.
Okay, and what's the difference between the CEREC PrimeScan and PrimeScan?
Good question. So essentially the technology is exactly the same. So whether or not you purchase a PrimeScan digital impression machine or a CEREC PrimeScan, it's fundamentally the exact same machine. The only difference between the two is the CEREC software. So where the PrimeScan sort of scan and send version is useful for people is people who are looking to just sort of get introduced to digital, that are looking for that entry point into the digital world, and then maybe at a future date would like to upgrade, they can just have the CEREC software loaded onto that PrimeScan and it becomes a CEREC PrimeScan. CEREC PrimeScan obviously is for all of those same uses, but also with the CEREC design, all in one visit and mill purposes.
Okay, lovely. And could you tell us about the AstraTech EV implant, the recent changes to the design of this?
Yeah, definitely. So the AstraTech EV implant system, it's recently had a change. So the threads have been made deeper, the apical threads have been made deeper, and what that helps out with is the primary stability of the implant. So it makes it better suited to cases where you like to immediately load than it was in the past.
Okay, that's great. And finally, tonight we're witnessing a digital implant workflow with the CEREC system. However, for those customers who are perhaps not ready, but still want to benefit from a digital implant workflow, what other solutions does Dentsply Sirona have to offer?
Yeah, so I think the most notable one that we have is the Azento service. And what this would allow dentists to do is still that high level of digital dentistry with implants, where essentially we could take a scan with a PrimeScan, for example, and also a CBCT. We can send those off to Azento, have the implant planned, which is really convenient. The Simplant guide will come back, as well as the Atlantis custom abutment and final restoration, as well as the drills, the implant itself, all together in one package. So essentially there still is a way of doing this, not necessarily all in-house. Even for those people that do have a CEREC system, they can still utilise the Azento service as well for those cases where you want a really convenient turnaround on an implant case.
Fantastic. Let's have a few more questions. So could you tell me about the Prime Mill, CEREC Prime Mill, a few features of the machine? Yeah,
absolutely. It's quite similar to our older milling machine in the sense that it is a similar 4-axis milling machine, but there's been a huge number of improvements that make it much easier to use for dental staff. So for example, we are now able to check every time we put in burrs and also blocks that the correct one is being placed in, so we don't encounter any milling errors. We are able to mill zirconias particularly much faster because we have generally much more robust motors in that milling machine. So typical times for a zirconia crown now can be done in around about 5 minutes. So super fast. And as well, obviously we've had a whole aesthetic redesigned to it to bring it in line with the PrimeScan.
Fantastic. And what could you tell us about the CEREC SpeedFire?
So with the CEREC SpeedFire, it is marketed as the fastest chairside sintering oven on the market. It is incredibly fast. So, you know, typically for a standard restoration, you could be expecting, let's say for an Emax type material, lithium disilicate material, maybe about 15 to 20 minutes in a SpeedFire furnace, which is quite a bit quicker than our competitors. But coupling it with other newer materials like CEREC to CERA, that can now come down to about 5 minutes for a sintering cycle. To add as well, it is also one of the only chairside sintering ovens that can do zirconia chairside. So if zirconia is an interest for you, chairside, then the Speedfire is the option for you.
Fantastic. And what type of treatment can be achieved within a single visit dentistry with CEREC system?
So there are many, and they are constantly expanding as well. So the most notable ones for CEREC, or the most common procedures, are undoubtedly crowns, but we can also use this for inlays, onlays, veneers, as well as bridges, and we can do a maximum of a 5-unit bridge, so anywhere between 2 and 5 can be done. And obviously what we're seeing today, or we will be seeing shortly, is also implant restoration as well, so single unit implant restorations. If you also have a Dentsply Sirona CBCT, that's where you can then combine the two softwares together and create a CEREC Guide 3 like Chris has done just a little bit earlier.
Fantastic. And could you elaborate on the previous point about the PrimeScan technology and tell us about the future applications of the PrimeScan in relation to the digital implant workflow?
Yeah, so we've actually got really exciting news because actually this week is the launch week of the 5.2 software. And with that, we will actually become the first intraoral scanner which has been officially validated by Atlantis for essentially implant bridge superstructures with Atlantis. So the only reason we've achieved that is because of the incredibly high accuracy levels with the PrimeScan, and it is all down to the technology inside the camera and the software optimizations.
So is that because of the software optimization that we are able to...
So we've had people from the get-go doing this. Even in the UK, we've got dentists that have been doing this for the last 2 years since the PrimeScan launched. And there are people now that are essentially bypassing a lot of the manual steps that we had with those types of workflows. So there are even people who completely digitized it from start to finish. It's only now that we're getting the official validation, because it's a very, very bold thing to do for a manufacturer, to give clinicians the absolute thumbs up that yes, this workflow is validated, it can be done. You won't really get that anywhere else in the dental industry.
So I guess the 2 years of testing is coming to an end now, where the...
Absolutely. You know, we've had people, obviously some are braver than others, some are more willing to try more experimental types of workflows, sort of straying off that traditional path. So we've had people do that, and we've had people all over the world do it. As I mentioned, we've got a few in the UK as well. And yeah, after these 2 years of testing, we're now officially validating that workflow with 5.2.
Fantastic. Sounds amazing. Thank you, Jack.
No problem.
Okay, I think we are ready for the second part of the event, in which case it's time to hand over to Chris to take us through the patient case for the restorative part of the digital implant workflow with CEREC. Chris, over to you.
So, to introduce the case to you, this is my patient Jane. Jane has given me the privilege actually of providing her with a second implant using a guided workflow. It's been it was actually an immediate implant we had to do with a fractured canine tooth that was broken subgingivally. The implant was placed a couple of months ago, and we're now ready for the restoration. So what I'd like to do is take you all through the restorative workflow of how we're going to restore this upper left canine. Now, because this tooth was placed as an immediate, one of the issues is the pressure against the bone that we're concerned about. Hence, what we had to do is have a buccal access for the screw. So we had to do Zuckman and crown, which we're going to talk about in the workflow. So one of the beauties about the CEREC system is that you can restore practically any implant, provided it's in the library. Dentsply Sirona CEREC has an extensive library of implants, so regardless of what implant system you're using, you're going to have an opportunity to use a CEREC to actually restore your implants digitally. And it's a really nice and pleasant way for your patients to experience the treatment. It shortens their treatment time. Most patients hate impressions, which is a difficult thing for patients, especially if they have a bad gag reflex. But we're going to see how easy it is to actually restore this case just using the digital workflow in the box. So one of the things you have to specify in the software is whether you're using a tire base or a scan post. The scan post is a little bit easier to scan with. Could I have a green one, please. Tim, you could come closer if you want to, so we can have a look inside the actual mouth. So here we see the healed implant that we've got on the upper left canine area. We start off just by normally just taking an intraoral scan of the upper arch, and what that involves. Let me just put the light out so we can get a better scan. But the beauty of the prime scan is the fact that it has such a wide field of view and a very deep field of capture as well, up to 20 millimeters. So it makes the scan really, really easy. So as I like to do is always scan to the contralateral canine so I can check occlusion as well when I'm designing, rather than just like a sectional area of the area that we're interested in. One of the problems you also might experience when you're scanning is if you have really bright lights, it does affect the way you're scanning. So you've got to make sure that you haven't got a lot of ambient lighting around the prime scan. Switch off your overhead light when you're doing the scan. It'll make your scan really, really easy. Okay. So there we can see we've got the information we need to capture with regard to the upper left canine. Okay. I'm also going to capture the lower arch. The lower arch is obviously relevant for designing the occlusion correctly. And again, a really easy pickup if you lose it on the prime scan. A really nice scanner, easy to use. And we can see this capturing in real time, yeah? Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to capture the buccal bite scan as well, just bite together for me. So a couple of the things we can do with the buccal bite scan is just scan both sides of the mouth, or we have a continuous scan to the other side. Important to capture both sides to make sure that we've got the occlusion correct as well. And one of the things I like to do then is to literally just copy that folder over so we can then start to capture the scan post and obviously the soft tissue. Right. Let's have the 2mm tile base. Okay. So we're going to remove the cover screw on top of the implant now. Again, nicely taken off. Getting the lights back in again to make sure we get this correct. Lovely. So here we see the scan body going into the actual implant, and all we need to do is ensure that this seats correctly on the implant. Don't make it too tight to start off with, and then rotate it to ensure that the scan post is sitting inside the implant correctly. That felt a lot good. You get a very positive connection to the implant when it gets into. We then put our little scan body on, which orientates in the software the position implant is in relation to the adjacent teeth, but more importantly, the depth of placement of the implant itself. So again, we'll switch off all the background lighting, and we'll continue with the scan. It is a really easy scanner to use, okay? That's better. This is nice with the new intraoral scanner. The prime scan itself uses a really good technology that'll scan dark objects, shiny objects. There's a lot of crowns here that Jane has had done previously, and as a result, you could have a problem with a triangulation type camera. But again, you know, some of the cameras you might have to use a little bit of powdering, but there's no such concern. We can see how beautifully it captures all the tissue here. And I'm just going to finish this last portion in here. which will allow me to then proceed to the production models. Okay, so we can capture that position really, really nicely. We go back to the gingival mask scan.
So if we watch the next video now, we'll be able to see how we take this forward with the CAD design software. And one of the things which I really like about CEREC is the fact that I can use it chairside with a multitude of different clinical applications with the patient, a variety of different software possibilities and tools that I can use. And like you can see in this case, this is the case that Chris is using. And in Chris's case, we have this tooth, which is going to be a cement retained crown, but we can use that for screw retained crowns. You know, obviously we can use it chairside for doing simple restorations like crowns, inlays, veneers, bridges. But in this case, we're using this for the implant restoration that Chris has designed. We're ignoring the fact that there's a screw access channel simply because it's a crown that we're going to be splitting later on. And in this stage, we're more looking at the fact that we're building the tooth into a position and a shape that's going to suit the rest of the anatomy of the patient. And there are simple tools that we have with that. The biogeneric abilities of the software will automatically look at the teeth, the contralateral canine, to shape it naturally in the proposal, which will be able to match. And once we propose the outline of that gingival area, the software will be able to propose the gingival profile, the emergence profile of that anatomy, to give us a crown that's copying the shape of whatever we've designed previously through temporary crowns or through what we had done with a custom abutment prior to the final restoration phase. In this position now where Chris is in the CAD software, we've designed the crown and we're just finishing off the final shape, making sure that the minimal thicknesses are observed for that material that we're using in this proposition. And then we move forward to split this crown. You can see that now we have the ability to customize the abutment underlying the crown. The crown and the abutment both can be customized to suit the material, like I said, that's being used. And in this case, we're using Emax that is there. Chris is just showing that the minimum thickness, he needs to just confirm that it is the correct thickness overall. And that little blue hue shows him that that needs to just be thickened up slightly. And we can change the parameters. So we can go through all of these different parameters to suit the clinical situation that we have for whatever patient and also material that we might be using. We can adjust how much pressure there is in the surrounding soft tissues and also how much of an impact the occlusion might have and the adjacent contacts. Once that's happened, then we can make the final adjustments into the abutment and the emergence profile area and make any last changes to the CAD design as it's being proposed in front of us. And one of the great things I like about CAD design in front of the patient is that I do this with the patient at hand. So the patient sees me, especially with the new AC chair, I can make those manipulations and use the touchscreen to just make very fine changes, touching around the cervical areas, adjusting and increasing, like Chris is doing here, with making the profile of the tooth match, but also adding surface anatomy that we can bring into the CAD software to really make an aesthetic outcome. Next, after this software, we're going to see Quintus using this to take not only the primary anatomy, but look at the surface anatomy and the micro details that he's going to be adding. And this is what we'll be using. We'll be using surface stains and glazes to really turn something that is a clinical situation that can be done in a few minutes into something that's very easy to finish to a beautiful restoration. So here we have Quintus. Quintus is going to be providing the surface texture to these crowns that we've pre-made. And you can see here that the surface finishing tools that he's using will allow him to make very fine changes to the anatomy of the tooth after the crown after it's been milled from the milling machine. And we can add fine details with this to really reproduce a very natural aesthetic, but also reproduce line angles in the tooth and really correct anything that we might want to after the sprue is removed from the block as it's removed from the machine. And you can see here, once he's adding these surface features, it really makes a beautiful finish. Quintus is obviously very gifted at this and has, taught many courses in making these very fine changes to promote absolutely beautiful surface features and microanatomy that will show up in certain lighting to just make the difference between a crown that looks like a similar color to something which matches and blends with the surrounding dentition. We often use, when we're doing this with the surface finish, different polishing instruments to take that surface from just a simple milled restoration to a finished crown that has a similar reflective capability to standard dentine and enamel that we'll be using and the surrounding dentition. So we can copy anatomy and color and texture of the teeth that we'll be using. And something again that I like when we're doing this hands-on with patients is being able to do this side by side with the patient. We can see how the very fine details and structures that we might have, wear facets, very fine details in the anatomy that we can then copy into the crown that we're restoring and make sure that the finish is beautiful and pleasing to the eye. The variety of instruments that Quintus is using, he'll change back and forth, and now you can see once he's happy with that surface finish, he's checking the fit of this crown against the custom abutment, against the tie base. The tie base fit will obviously fit against the implant, and the tie base will cement and bond into the custom abutment, which will be screw retained into place before the final crown is cemented over the top. Obviously, if we would have chosen a different clinical scenario where we would have had a screw retained crown, this might be a simple one-step procedure with a single mill, with a single crown milled out to the block that you could finish and then bond with the tie base to fit straight away. But obviously in this case, we have a two-part crown and abutment, and you can see just by checking the fit of all of the different components, Quintus is making sure that the finished restoration, once it's placed and cemented into place, the margins are going to be sound, there's no overhangs, the margins are going to be integral all the way around with no chipping, and making sure that the fit is going to be beautiful. So once he's performed all of this, the finished crown we can see here that's been pre-made, he's going to pass to Chris, and Chris is going to be fitting this in the patient's mouth. Obviously, we need to take into account when we're doing chairside clinical finishing, whether we're doing glazing or staining or hand finishing, we need to take into account the fact that the glazes may add thicknesses themselves, and also check that the tie base is going to fit into the restoration appropriately. And there are two types of tie bases that we would use in the CEREC system, depending on the different implant systems that we have available for choice in the CAD software. There's the size L and the size S. And in this case, you can see that he's using A14 L block, but different implant systems will use different sized blocks. You can see he's used an implant analog to place the tie base into the analog and check the fit of the crown against the custom abutment to make sure that the fit is seamless and isn't going to cause any irritation to the gingival architecture around it that we've spent a lot of time making sure has been pushed into a position that we're happy with to create a beautiful emergence profile. And you can see here the finished crown has been stained and glazed to match the surrounding dentition. And we have the finished crown ready to cement. Thank you, Quintus. When we're using this chairside, one of the great benefits of the CEREC system, like I said, is the ability to really tailor your approach to any clinical situation that we have. We can use implant crowns that we can use screw retained, cement retained, and we can match that in with different hues and translucencies of materials that we can choose to fit in the different teeth that we're going to be placing the restorations over, be that high translucency or low translucency that we have available. Chris is going to be now placing the finished restoration in the patient's mouth, and at first he's going to be placing the abutment into place, and torquing that down to the correct level as is appropriate for the implant manufacturer that he has in this case. You can see here he's going to remove the healing abutment that he has already placed. And Chris is scanning again. To capture the gingival profile that we didn't capture before. So you can see the depth of the cover of the scanner is really quite incredible because it's capturing right to the depth of that screw channel for the implant. You can see the hex, you can see the rings around with the screw channel, but most importantly, we've captured the emergence profile perfectly, which if you are using with a lab or in-house, you can transfer to create a beautiful implant restoration straight away. And one of the great things about the CEREC system is it is so easy to adapt to your own workflow. You might choose to use this in a situation where, like Jack said before, we're only using it for scanning and sending to the lab, or you might choose to make a custom abutment at the time of surgery, or in this case that we're going to be placing for the patient after a period of healing. The scan body that we've scanned before has determined the position of the implant that's underneath in not only depth but rotation, so the implant restoration that we've produced will sit perfectly into that emergence profile that we spent time developing to create a nice natural appearance, despite the fact that the implant is situated slightly with a buccal screw access. And you can see here just slight pressure, which was intended to create a really perfect fit for both the implant restoration and also maintain the gingival architecture around it. And you can see also that that crown fit down nicely to the edges of that restoration without any pressure on the surrounding dentition. The adjacent contacts weren't too difficult for it to place against. And Chris is just torquing this down a little bit more because of that tightness. And that slight little bit of blanching, Chris is now just checking that we can get papillary infill again to get that colour to come back. A little bit he's happy with. If there was too much, Chris might decide to remove and just polish that a little bit just to take that pressure away from the gingiva. Chris is manually torquing this down, and the torque wrench he's going to place, monitoring the torque that's placed into that custom abutment that he's created. Carefully monitoring the situation as he's taking this down, making sure that it's torquing to the correct level, and also keeping an eye on the blanching of the gingiva around it. Making sure the patient's happy, it's not causing any discomfort. Most of the time when we're producing crowns and placing them same day or after healing like this, whether it's immediate or long term, when we're fitting these crowns and abutments, in a lot of the situations we'll be placing them, it's very little discomfort, so we can place this without anesthetic. But of course, that all depends on what parameters you choose in the CAD software and the design that you choose to follow. You might choose to follow the emergence profile that you've captured exactly, or potentially place a little bit pressure just to put a little bit more around any of the gingival sulcus. Chris is now placing a little bit of PTFE tape into that screw channel. Everything's been torqued down, and he's packing PTFE tape just to protect the screw channel on the abutment. When he's placing the PTFE tape, Chris needs to make sure that he's not leaving any of the PTFE tape above the level of the buccal screw access, which would potentially interfere with the crown on placement, and instead just leave a slight gap to fill in with the cement as he places the crown. And again, one of the great things about designing chairside is the fact that we can customize the position of that split between the custom abutment and the crown that Chris has designed. So we can choose to place that a little bit super gingerly in a lot of the cases, because of the materials being so aesthetic, that we can choose that contact point, choose the split just below the contact points, but yet still being friendly to the gingiva, so we can remove any cement after placement of the crown. Crown here filled with cement that's been pre-bonded. And obviously when we're using things chairside, you wouldn't be used to if you send it to the lab, but we have to ourselves etch the restoration, silinate and bond the restoration ready for bonding with a light cure based material or a dual cure based material, depending on the clinical indication that we have at hand. He's doing a very light cure around the margins here, so they can nicely remove that little bit of cement before it sets too much, and also so that he can make sure that it's going to be removed from where the gingival sulcus is for any of the points that are subgingival, even if only slightly. And one of the points that Chris always states with his studies that he teaches is the fact that one of the beautiful things with EMAX and the CEREC restorations is that we have full control over the roughness of the surface of the abutment, and we can tailor it to the approach that we're taking with it. If it's a custom abutment, we can create a very, very aesthetic restoration that's not glazed underneath the gingiva, which will promote gingival attachment whilst making the separate crown, in this case, fully glazed for aesthetics. And once the crown is seated, Chris is just checking these contact points with the floss to make sure that they are tight enough to prevent food impaction, whilst still keeping any of the embrasures clear. Final cure, just to make sure that the crown is fully cemented to the custom abutment. And we're almost finished with the procedure. Generally, when we're providing this sort of service same day, then obviously we can provide this in a single visit potentially. And this could mean that we could provide the stage from impression to final restoration seating in under an hour. And a lot of the time we might end up just having a slightly more relaxed approach, but still even under an hour and a half, but making your clinical time efficient yet less stressful. Here Chris is just checking the occlusion and making sure that the match is good to the adjacent teeth. Again, he's just checking that there isn't too much blanching here. Chris is happy, patient smiling, and a successful restoration has been placed. Finally checking the margins to make sure there's any last little bits of cement. And that's the treatment completed. Patient has a new tooth and walks away with the restoration, potentially, in the single visit. You can see here, she's smiling, looking at the mirror. Wow, I think she said. Look at that. I can't believe how good that looks. That's brilliant. Thank you, Chris. And she's very happy. The whole procedure's gone very smooth. Thank you, Chris, for showing us that procedure there.
Predictable the workflow is using the digital workflow for restoring dental implants. And like I said, I've had the privilege of Jane coming back to see me again, to do a second implant for her using the digital workflow. Jane, do you want to share with us what you feel the experience has been using digital dentistry in the provision of your treatment?
Well, I think I've said before, I feel I've been sitting on the Starship Enterprise in a way. In Dr. McCoy's office, it's absolutely astonishing the technology that's advanced. I come from an era of dentists with pliers, so this is just phenomenal. I think the fact that you can now digitize rather than having to use that awful gunky stuff in your mouth is absolutely brilliant. I can't say how fantastic it's been. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane. So really, digital dentistry is about improving not just your workflow and the way that you're working. Digital dentistry is about making the whole experience for your patient better and making the whole profile of dentistry better, not just for ourselves and our peers, but especially for our valued patients.
Thank you, Chris. Fantastic result. Great to see. Yes, now let's jump into the Q&A section. We've got some questions from the audience. So first question is for Patrick. Patrick, what impact has offering single-visit dentistry with CEREC had on patients' experience?
Oh, I think that's a fantastic question. It really has enabled patients to have the treatment with much quicker turnaround, much more predictability because they can be involved in the actual planning process. If we do a crown, we can show them chairside exactly how it's going to come out. We can show them different options. And as Adam said before, even with implant crowns, we have the availability to adjust those fine features just with the patient in the chair. And of course, quick turnaround means that they come in the morning and walk out with a finished restoration, which is fantastic.
Fantastic. Thank you, Patrick. Adam, question for you. Is CEREC for everyone, or do you need to be a specialist to use it?
Well, for that, I think I'd probably answer by way of when I was initially getting into CEREC, best part of a decade ago now, when I was first using the machine, and really before I bought the machine, a lot of people said that CEREC wasn't for aesthetic cases, wasn't for every indication, it was just for simple restorations. And while that might have been the case historically with previous generations before the Omnicam, I would have said, these days, especially with the prime scan and the technology we have at hand with CAD dentistry, we can really use it for every indication. It's a great pleasure to be able to design with the patient at hand and also to match the CAD-CAM workflow, to use it to match restorations, to match clinical appearances. Single tooth is no longer as difficult because you have the patient that you can finish the restoration with it there chairside, or use to send to a lab to finish that restoration for yourself. So you have a multitude of different options available, but one of the best things is just simply the fact that you aren't using impressions anymore. So for me, is CEREC for everybody? Is digital dentistry for everybody? I would absolutely say yes, and I would welcome everybody to the future of dentistry.
Fantastic, thank you, Adam. Next question is for Quintus. Quintus, has CEREC enabled you to do things in your practice you couldn't do before?
Yes, Cassia, definitely. There is no way that I can practice without all of my digital toys anymore. It has revolutionized our practice, and we've never looked back. We bought our first system in 2012, and we're on system 3 now, and literally we just keep on going. So it's an amazing, amazing asset for your practice. And like Cassia always likes me to say is, you can have your cake and eat it with the CEREC system.
Fantastic. Thank you, Quintus. Next question is for Chris. Chris, what's the return on investment with CEREC?
So that's a difficult question, Cassia. People often want to know, will I get a return on investment? For me, when I look at digital or any dental equipment, for me it's about making my job easier, but more importantly, making the journey for the patient better. There isn't a day that goes by without me using my CEREC, and I think whatever the price is on that CEREC, the Dentsply Sirona CEREC, I would be happy to engage with that because of the privileges and advantages it affords me, but more importantly, what it affords for our patients.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. We've got a few more questions from the audience. So let's go to Jack. Jack, I've got a question for you. Will the 5.2 update be available for Omnicam 2?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 5.2 update will be rolled out for all supported scanners, which at the moment is the older generation Omnicam and PrimeScan, as we've discussed already. With the Omnicam, obviously you can't expect the same kind of camera improvements that we've done for the PrimeScan, but all of the under the hood optimization, like the faster loading of cases, the smaller file sizes, the improvement to the CEREC guide workflow, they're all going to be there for the Omnicam as well.
Fantastic. We've got one more question for you. Question for Jack. Is CEREC really worth it?
Yeah, so I think I could answer this question very well, and I think he's actually in the audience as well with us tonight. I saw a little message from him earlier. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the CEREC system can do wonders for the practice. I'm in the lucky position to have worked with many practices now with their journey through digital dentistry with CEREC and the PrimeScan. You know, talking about return on investment, the question that was asked to Chris a little bit earlier, you know, one of the people we've got in the audience tonight is one of the, you know, number of people that we've had that has made a complete success out of the CEREC system. We're talking a single chair practice who was able to pay off their entire CEREC system and then some within about 5 or 6 months, and has gone on to make some, you know, fairly large investments in other things as well. He'll probably like me using this example, but he's just purchased a luxury car for himself off some of the return that he's had on the CEREC system. So, you know, if a single chair practice can do that for, you know, a practice, then, you know, what can it do for a surgery of 2 or 3 dentists or more?
Thank you very much for answering that, Jack. I think this will conclude the event tonight. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to the team at Digital Smile Studio. Thank you, Patrick, Adam, Quintus, and Chris, and also the nurse, Carla, as well as the patient. Thank you, Jack, for joining, and the team at Dentsply Sirona for their support with the event as well. And thank you all for joining us tonight. If you'd like to explore the CEREC technology in your practice and would like to benefit from the current CEREC promotions, please book one-to-one consultation on our website with one of our CAD/CAM specialists. And also, in a few days' time, you'll be receiving an email with a question, with a request to complete a short survey to hear your feedback. Please take 2 minutes of your time to tell us what you thought of this format. We'd love to hear your feedback. Also, consider joining us next week to learn how investing in digital technology can enhance the profitability of your practice and enhance its valuation. Learn from our guest speaker, Chris Trevens, a recognized expert in dental valuation and practice finance. Join us on 12th of July, 7 p.m. The registration link for this event is in the link now. That's it for now. Thank you and goodbye.